My name is Shyheim Williams, aka ConjuringLiteracy, and I'm sitting here with Helena Haywoode Henry, the author of Last Chance Live. And we are the Black Book Bash, and I'm going to start off with our first question. Actually, the first question is really just sitting, and I want you to tell you about yourself. I found some bios online, but I don't feel like they don't encapsulate who you are, and so I wanted you to say who you are in your own words.
Well, I'm Helena Haywoode Henry. I am the author of Last Chance Live, a book about teens on death row who compete on a reality TV show in which America votes for one contestant to win freedom and forgiveness. I am a mom of 3. I used to practice law, and now I write books. And I am introducing Eternity Price, the main character of Last Chance Live, to all of you.
All right, thank you so much. Eternity Price was a character. So we can start off with talking about the name. What was the significance of Eternity Price's name?
So Eternity is written to defy stereotype and to position a girl that we don't usually see in the role of an archetype as an archetype. And I view Eternity really as a stand-in for all of us, for all humankind, and that's where her name came from. Eternity is a stand-in for all of us because we are all in death row, in a sense. And the reason I say that is, much like Eternity, we've all done wrong things, and every one of us is headed to a grave. Hopefully not soon, but and often the wrong things that we've done aren't of the magnitude and consequence as what Eternity and her fellow contestants did. But we have to contend with those same questions that Eternity does, namely, what have I done? What is the cost of what I've done, and where am I headed? What's going to happen to me? And so as Eternity explores those questions, the book then invites the readers to reflect on those existential things we all have to go through.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the way that you weaved in like quotidian natures of crime and criminal thoughts versus like the really ideas of like criminalization and the ways that we all, like you said, we're all capable of having the capacity of a crime. We all have these wrong thoughts and how they move towards what happens to eternity.
Yeah.
So first, I would like to talk about your career as an attorney, attorney, and how did they influence your approach to telling the eternity story?
So I used to practice a different type of law than what the book focuses on. I do not have any criminal defense experience, but what it did really prepare me for was writing a world where the world building of Last Chance Live was, I think, well done and robust. The contestants all come from different states and different jurisdictions. So one thing that was important to me was making sure that the crimes the contestants committed would actually be considered capital offenses in the states that they were in. So just researching what the contours of those offenses would look like and what aggravating circumstances or mitigating circumstances might apply, and capturing that. And much of the premise of Last Chance Live actually came from an American Bar Association resolution that they issued in 2018. And the American Bar Association put out something for jurisdictions that still have the death penalty, encouraging those jurisdictions to think about whether it should still apply to offenders who committed their crimes under the age of 25, in light of emerging neuroscience that shows that young people, though they might become legal adults at the age of 18, their brain generally continues to develop until as late as 25, raising the question of whether they're really biological adults and whether we should be penalizing them in that way with the death penalty for a crime that they committed at that age. So that sort of legal world and legal thinking, I think, helped me wrap my arms around the question. The Supreme Court did prohibit the death penalty to people 18 and under in a 2005 case, Roper v. Simmons. And so one thing I wanted to examine with Eternity and what she did is whether that line of 18 years old is really a meaningful one. Eternity, her crime happens on her birthday, raising a question of if it was just a couple hours before, she would have ended up in a totally different trajectory than where she finds herself.
And I think everyone knows, maybe not everyone, but my brother initially, he's on life without parole right now. He initially was sentenced to maybe 10 years. His first time he was incarcerated at 16. He was sentenced as an adult at 16 for double murder and a gang shootout where they were never able to really determine who the actual shooter was, especially considering when they were all shooting each other. And then the second incident was kind of the same thing, where it was a random shot that was shot out that no one knew who did it, but him being like the OG in his gang, he took the crime for his other like subordinates, I guess. And so it really does beg the question of specifically knowing his circumstances growing up. Was he even like, could he be tried as an adult when he was witnessing domestic violence, when he was suffering abuses from his parents, and all these things that like contributed to his criminalization and him living the life that he lived?
Yeah, those are all what's known as mitigating factors that courts will sometimes take into consideration, particularly when applying something like the death penalty. It sounds like your brother's on a different trajectory, but those are questions that I really wanted readers to think about critically too, as they contemplate how someone like Eternity gets to where she is. How do someone like the contestants get to where they are? And what were the factors that influenced that? Which factors were systemic? Which factors were their own responsibility? There are lots of people who, as you say, are absolutely capable of what Eternity does. They just perhaps don't have the opportunity. There are also lots of people who are in Eternity's shoes and they don't make that choice, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you can look at it. And I really wrote Last Chance Live to offer readers more a framework of how to think about these types of questions, both societal and existential, but not necessarily what to think. And I wanted to leave room for their conclusions and their perspectives to be a part of the discourse.
And you used systemic a couple of times, and there's a conversation that is happening amongst different groups here about the existence of systemic racism. So would you like to make a comment about systemic racism, both in general and how it impacts your book?
So I'll tell you we talked about where the premise came from, that American Bar Association resolution. The character of Eternity came from a little girl I met when I was an undergraduate at the University of Pennsylvania. And I volunteered in a local West Philadelphia public school. And I met this little girl who was a 4-year-old in a Head Start class. And she was an absolute star. She belonged on TV. She should have got her own Disney Channel show, whatever. And at the same time that I was working with her and her peers in Head Start, I was also babysitting for the child of 2 Penn professors. Both of these kids were 2 blocks from this university. And one thing that really struck me and has stayed with me in the more than decade since I was at Penn was that these 2 children were about the same age. They were equidistant from this massive institution with all of this privilege and resources. And the likelihood that they would have the same trajectory or the same opportunity to access that university and its privileges was 0, right? This child in Head Start, even though she couldn't read, and that little boy they was half couldn't read, there in some ways it seemed like their lives were set. And so the question as to why that is the case is just so baked into the soil of how these systems work, of how housing works, of dynamics of poverty, of how people like her grow up and how they're viewed by the systems that they participate in, and how that experience would be different from the other child that I babysat for, who was not a child of color, who was not coming from poverty. And I think that part of our reluctance, our national reluctance to think about systemic racism is because we bristle at the notion that there's anything wrong with us. You know, we bristle at the notion that America is flawed in an eternal sense. But I will say this, when you have something like slavery, like what was part of the, if not the founding, then certainly the development of the nation, when you have something of that magnitude and that degree of wickedness, it's impossible for that to seep into the soil and then just come out, right? It's a type of sin, right? And it really can't be eradicated by a couple of policies and the Civil Rights Act and whatnot. And I think that part of why we see a resurgence in some of those same dynamics that were a part of our ugly history is because it's in the soil, right? Because it can't be rooted out by legislative achievement. And what I hope Last Chance Live does is I hope it encourages readers to reflect on how eternity is all of us, and that darkness and wickedness that infects the country, it infects our hearts too, regardless of what your circumstances are. And we have the ability and the agency to make changes if we don't like how the tale of two children plays out in our nation, or how people like eternity end up where they are, or if we don't like the trajectory of what America was or where it might be headed. We have choices.
Right. So I don't talk about this often, so I don't know if you know, but I got my master's from St. Joseph's. So we were literally down the street from each other.
Yeah.
And in my time at St. Joseph's, I was an after-school program teacher in Haverford. And then after I left Haverford, I became a full-time teacher in Camden. So I had the direct experience of looking at children like, wow, you're the same age, but your parents are neuroscientists.
Right.
And you don't know your mama or your dad, and you're in foster care in Camden where you have to walk 20 miles to school because you are trying to get to the good school.
Right.
It's stark. I think I had a conversation last week with my friend who wants to move to Philly. Like, you could walk through Philly blocks, like 10 of them, and you'll go through from 1st to 2nd Street. Is going to be maybe some big houses. So as you hit 3rd Street, ghetto.
Yeah.
And then 5th Street, back to big houses. By 6th Street, you might be in the ghetto again.
Yeah, that's Philadelphia.
It's a very interesting place. And so I think it did weave my politics, thinking about like the social determinants to success in college. But what your book kind of does talk about is the social determinants to crime and how that's complicated with the individual. I know you have a lot of characters, so it might be hard to pick a top 3, and I don't want to qualify what that top is, if it's a favorite, a dislike, or whatever. But if you could choose 3 characters that you could talk about their story and some of the ways that they were like socially determined to be crimes, or the ways they disrupted the legacy they should have had based off of like their social economic status.
So that's a fantastic question, because some of the contestants on Last Chance Live did not have those social determinants. And there's one in particular that I'm thinking of who had a very privileged trajectory and does not come from a community of color. The ones who did, there are young people who on the show who don't have a stable family at home, right? They didn't have a stable home life. They had parents who were doing a lot to provide for them, working a lot, not very available, housing instability, things like that, that put these children on a lower tier of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So one thing that the book explores through the show's offer for therapy and rehabilitation is how people function when different needs are not met. And a lot of the contestants, not all of them, but a lot of them were struggling with level 1 and 2. They were struggling with just primary, I need food and I need shelter. And I am not even capable of engaging and thinking about higher order desires like wants and dreams and whatnot, because I'm trying to just deal with survival. And that comes from some of those social determinants, from housing instability, from poverty, from whatnot. The eternity, interestingly enough, is not quite there. And so to understand where eternities come from, she has some tragedy in her life, and she's lost her parents, but she is in a stable home. She is not in a foster care system. She's not on her own. What she's struggling with is really the ways that society has spoken to her. She is a young, overweight, dark-skinned girl. And she receives a lot of her understanding of who and what she is from outside forces, from her peers, from social media, from the infotainment ecosystems around her. And in spite of that, eternity holds on very tightly to her dreams, which are twofold, really. One, to have the quintessential American childhood, which she defines as going to Disney. And 2, to be what her mother always hoped and believed she could be. And eternity wants to go to Penn. Eternity wants to be just like those other kids. The kids that I went to school with and the kids that I worked for. And eternity, her dream gets derailed, well, it's really for the reader to decide. Is it because of these societal factors, right? Or is it because of her? Or is it both? Or is it something else, right? Like what is the primary injustice in Last Chance Live? I don't actually know the answer,
Right.
And I would encourage readers to read and to figure out what they think the answer is.
Yeah, and I texted you about this, and I was so mad, y'all. I was so mad. But she really makes you make your own decision. Like, I was like, I really want you to tell me how I should feel. By maybe chapter 20, I was like, please tell me how I should feel right now, because I don't know. Because maybe like 25% of the book, I was like, I don't think I like Eternity. She got a smart mouth. And then I thought about it, I was like, you know what? You got a smart mouth. Huh. I don't know. It was you. I'm trying my best not to spoil y'all.
Yeah.
You did an amazing job.
Well,
And if y'all are all y'all here, the book is early release. It comes out on Tuesday. So y'all can get it at the bookstore now. So that's a special
for Black books. The first readers.
The first ones to get it.
Well, that was intentional. I really wanted Eternity to capture the full range of who we really are, not just our polite selves sitting here looking all cute, right? But like the full range of the hope that we harbor and the darkness that we harbor. And to the extent that Eternity is unlikable, there's a lot of us that's unlikable. Like you say, I got a smart mouth too, right? And so the question is, in spite of that, are we still lovable, right? Can we still be forgiven for what we've done? Is there any hope for us, given that full range of who we are as humans?
I'm going to go back to Eternity in a second. But I work in digital humanities, which is this idea of the humanities informing the digital and vice versa. And I work on an AI project now, trying to figure out HBCU usage with AI. And so there was a moment in the book where we found out that there was a use of AI in determining sentencing and like just the criminalization and if they're worthy of what the crime is, if they did the crime in their sentencing. So could you talk about why did you use AI? I also don't know if I have a date of when this is situated. So is this like a almost distant future, a near future, America, in the ways that like technology, hyper surveillance, and all these post-technology America things that impact the ways that Black people are being criminalized?
So as for the date is intentionally 2020 something, right? And the reason for that is it's right now,
right?
And it could be tomorrow, and it could have been yesterday, and so it's not a big leap from our world. To be clear, so in terms of AI in the book, there was no AI use in the drafting or researching or anything like that of the book at all. I don't even know what ChatGPT is, to be honest. I don't know if it's a website, if it's an app.
Don't use it. It's destroying the environment.
I'm going to be the last person in America to figure that out. But the New York Times has reported extensively on the use of algorithms and predictive AI in the criminal justice system. I have not found research showing its use in capital punishment, but that's not a big leap from just the regular criminal justice system. And what will often happen is the predictive algorithm will get a history and a zip code and whatnot, and then we'll give recommendations, sentencing recommendations, and things like that. There is still, human and prosecutorial and judicial discretion applied, but it begs the question of whether it's the executive producer of Last Chance Live notes, Johnny from Pleasantville and Jamal from Compton, does the algorithm recommend the same outcomes for them? And, I do think that it's a great way to see this broader trend that is happening not just in our systems, but with ourselves individually. How much we are outsourcing our individual analysis to an algorithm, right? Or to anything external. So for much of us, just as individual people, our infotainment ecosystem tells us what to think. Our political party tells us what to think. Our, social media tells us what to think. And we often are relieved of the opportunity to do the work of examining for ourselves what we think the answer should be, much like this predictive algorithm relieves some of the judicial system of figuring out what do we do with this thorny question of culpability. And so what I wanted Last Chance Life to do is really be a help to readers to to invite readers to work on some of those muscles of how to think, not what to think, right? To be given a case study of sorts, a fact pattern more than a traditional story, where the reader doesn't have anywhere to outsource that analysis to. There's no thing that can give them the answer. That can be that reader doesn't have anywhere to outsource that analysis to. There's no thing that can give them the answer. That can be that predictive AI for them and the way that predictive AI works for the judicial system. Because I have a personal fear and that I've held for a long time, which is I worry about what will happen to us as a society if over time we continue to just let AI and whatever is happening with these search engines that now look totally different every time I use them, expand and creep and crowd out our neural pathways that are supposed to do that work of like, how do you research something? How do you come to an answer? How do you find, directions? How do you look at a menu and figure out which one has spinach, right? Like whatever it is, whatever neural pathways that give you that ability to do that work, what happens after generation after generation after generation stops doing it? Do our brains evolve to decide, I don't need that anymore. I don't need to think critically. I don't need to research, and now we as humans have just lost that ability because the machines do it for us.
Right.
And so that dynamic that you see with the legal system and AI, that real world dynamic, and that one captured in the book, is something I'm concerned about for us individually.
I feel like my panels this weekend have been perfect segues. So I appreciate y'all for just being brilliant. So as a professor, especially an English professor for freshmen, it is my job to teach them how to research. And as I said, I work in digital humanities. Your book speaks directly to Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology. I don't know if you've heard of it. I can send you the recommendation. It literally talks about the ways that technology has impacted us criminally, but also talking about hyper surveillance, AI, all those kinds of things. And so it really raises the question that in the ivory tower, we're having all these conversations. We're talking to AI, all those kinds of things. And so it really raises the question that in the ivory tower, we're having all these conversations. We're talking about like the things that we're noticing. But Eternity says something that I think was very important to the work that I do. For context, throughout the book, Eternity she emphasizes that she's not understanding like these large words that the lawyers and all these people are using to her, and she wants people to just explain things plainly. And so something happens in the book where she kind of says like, what is the SAT word for that? And it sat with me like, wow, like we do all this work in the academy, but it's not accessible. In a lot of ways, it's not providing solutions to the actual problems that we're studying. So could you talk about that? The ways that we're brilliant, we're intellectual, but we're not really impacting the world in a tangible way.
Yeah. So the feeling I wanted to capture in the beginning of the book and the end of the book is what it's like to navigate a system that is talking about you and your life and what's happening to your life, but using language that you cannot understand. And that's really how the legal system works, right? And the challenge is, I think, twofold. We don't have a good way and don't, I think, make a concerted effort to translate very well, right? We don't develop our systems in a way that make them accessible to people, and we don't do the work of sort of bridging. And I also do think it's incumbent upon young people to want to know, to want to say, hey, I know this world is not built for me. And if I want to be a contender in it, I've got to do quadruple the work. Should it be that way? No, right? But it is that way. And so I think it's incumbent upon young people to like equip themselves to be able to navigate and participate and have a seat at the table of how these systems work, and to not have everything be an SAT word, right? And so one way that I think young people do that, or one way to start, a good starting place, is just, what do you think about issue X, right? Like what is the vocabulary of that issue? What are the words that are a part of, systemic racism or these legal systems or whatnot? And what do you need to wrap your arms around in order for you to be able to participate in a discussion about it?
Thank you. So circling back to Eternity, there was a aspect of the book that I think it circles back to our conversations about like these intrusive thoughts or this internal dialogue that she has throughout the book. that really has you side-eyed, or like, for context, you don't really find out what eternity does until well into the book. And so, like I told you, how you get to make your own opinion, you really do form your own opinion, the same way that the show doesn't tell the contestants, the public, the contestants' crime. And so we do learn eternity through her eternal dialogue. And I know a lot of us, I'm not gonna say a lot of us, because I'm sure there's people who have good thoughts all the time. I hope there are. But there are a lot of people who have bad thoughts throughout the day that they don't act on. Like you mentioned that earlier. So could you talk about why was it important for you to give us Eternity's internal dialogue and the ways that you kind of shaped our understanding of her before you revealed what she actually did?
So I wanted to capture with Eternity something that I think is universal. I think we all harbor that degree of hatred and rage that she has. We just don't all act on it, or we have other, thoughts and neural pathways that sort of course correct. And I think that we actually saw in the real world, in the news, a few interesting case studies that show how eternity and those intrusive thoughts and whatnot, that's really a universal phenomenon. One is Luigi Mangione, the alleged United Healthcare shooter. Luigi, I think, is a fascinating case study because he came very close to being a uniter of a deeply partisan split America, right? On the left and the right, people managed to converge behind him. And I think the reason for that is his youth and physical attractiveness served as a conduit that allowed people to see themselves in him and to see their own internal rage in his rage, right? And so maybe they didn't necessarily condone what he allegedly did, or the way he went about it, but they understood it, right? Because they harbor that rage too, that same anger at the healthcare system and the injustice of how these things work. And if he was different looking, let's just say, people can't see the reflection in that as much. But it really illuminated how what Luigi did, what Eternity did, that sort of darkness, that's in everybody. And I had a really good time going through some of the comment sections of different forums, particularly the ones populated by well-educated majority community women in their 30s and 40s, and just seeing them totally co-sign Luigi, right? I mean, people you would not expect, right? And the other news story that really captured this dynamic, showing that Eternity's interiority, her intrusive thoughts, all that is really universal, is the recent murder conviction of wealthy Floridian grandmother Donna Adelson. So that case, there is a law professor, Dan Markel, who was murdered in his garage. Years later, the matriarch of this family and the mother of his ex-wife, Donna Adelson, was convicted of murder. Prosecutors say that she murdered him because her daughter was getting a divorce. She wanted her grandchildren to be able to move away, and the dad was in the way of their relocation, so she had him killed. And this is not Eternity, right? She had no systemic factors. She didn't, grow up in poverty. This is a very wealthy, grandma, right? But it's universal, right? It is a universal phenomenon. And so I think it's easy to read Eternity and to be like, well, I don't like her. And well, yeah, she's a product of this, but I would never, and such whatever. And I think Luigi and Donna Adelson prove we all would, given the right kind of mix of circumstances, and but for the grace of God and whatever else, we all would do those things. And we have to therefore really take up the challenge of engaging with Eternity differently.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question, and I'll see if there's anyone in the audience who has a question. If there are two takeaways that you want the audience to take away from Last Chance Live, what would they be?
So one is, in my mind, the story of Last Chance Live really begins after the last page. And I say that because the reader is in some ways the main character of Last Chance Live, both because Eternity is a mirror to ourselves, but also because the brightest reflection of hope and change and agency and repair for the world of Last Chance Live is in the reader, and it's in what the reader does in the real world after reading the book. The world of Last Chance Live is only static in the pages, but it's not static outside here, right? And so that would be the first thing. And then I think the second thing is that I hope it encourages us to see ourselves differently and to see other people differently, right? To recognize the dreams and the hope and the aspirations and the joy and the goodness that does bind all of us, and that darkness that we all share, and that there are answers for that, but there are answers that the reader has to discover for themselves.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience who has a question?
I guess with the AI in your book, because they always say AI doesn't really have like a human connection. So when it comes to like, you know, if there's like a Black person that committed a crime versus a white person, you think it would look at them both, like I guess in the same eyes, since racism kind of has like a emotion or hatred, I guess mostly. Like, do you think the AI in your book would do that?
So that's a fascinating question, and that question has been the subject of a lot of reporting and discourse in the real world, because that's actually, in theory, the argument for it, right? That the proponents of these technologies and the companies that make them for the court systems, they say, well, it's better than having a judge, right, who might have his own biases and whatnot when he's dealing with this person from Compton, that person from Pleasantville. That's the argument they make. The problem is really it's a black box, the same way the mind of a judge is a black box, and you can't peer into it, and it's proprietary. And how is it being trained, right? So these AI, these algorithms are being given information to determine, well, how does a zip code serve as a determinant of future crime? How does a prior offense, right? Like what's the relevance of these factors? And a human has to train that, right? Or some other data set in the real world. So is it possible for these algorithms to really be free of bias and whatnot? You know, that's something I would encourage readers to explore. But I think it's an important question.
And to also answer that, there's a book, thankfully. There's a book for everything. I see the cover. And so I think my brain has conjured the words, but it's called Algorithms of Oppression. And it talks about the ways that white people who have created these AI systems have weaved their racial bias into the code. And so they have no choice but to emulate the human that is made. But now, as we have like user interfaces that are learning, since we live in a racist society, they're learning racism. So unfortunately, the answer to your question is yes, they will discriminate.
Listening to the part of the story and the conversation, it reminds me of more simple citizens. You're forcing people to think for themselves, and so I guess I want to ask, what other works do you think?
So contemporary works, I would say Nick Stone's Dear Justice, Dear Manny, for some different reasons. If I may be so bold to put myself, I wouldn't say in conversation with Octavia Butler, but I am deeply influenced by her and very much admire her work. I think often about that essay she wrote for Essence magazine, 25 years ago now, How to Predict the Future. And she talks about being a student of history and really understanding what came before to get a sense of what's coming. And so my hope is that I encourage readers, young readers, adult readers, to be students of history, because I think one of the challenges that we're facing right now is amnesia, right? There's a lot being invested in creating a societal culture of amnesia, in ensuring that there is a disconnect between young people of today and awareness of the legacy that they come from and why that legacy was the way it was. And I think it's essential to really combat that and to really armor oneself and equip oneself so that that battle for amnesia is won.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other questions? All right.
So when you were describing, I guess I want to ask, like, why did you choose her to look the way she does? Does that impact this, the situations that she's faced with, or is that something you want to figure out?
Well, both, but my choice in it was, she's on a TV show, right? American Idol style. And she needs this country, right, to pick her. Those are the stakes. And if they don't pick her, she will be eliminated and her execution will be implemented within a week. So she is battling other contestants who don't have some of the additional obstacles that her physical appearance presents, which was really important for me to examine, just for my own intellectual curiosity, honestly, in what ways does America embrace someone who looks like eternity? In what roles is America willing to see them? And why does eternity view herself the way she does? And are there other options? Are there other narratives that she could have internalized by who and what she is? And I think it's also a worthwhile undertaking for readers to contemplate how much does that impact it, right? How much does that matter? We talked a little about Luigi, right? Would Luigi be getting the Luigi response if Luigi didn't look like Luigi, right? If Luigi looked like, there's one character on the show that Eternity describes as looking like King Kong, right? How does America respond to Luigi if he looked like King Kong? Mm-hmm. Well, I think we actually got a taste of it with the recent tragedy in Charlotte, the attack on a young Ukrainian immigrant by a person of color, right? That was just immediately taken off to the races. And I think it would have gotten a lot further if we hadn't had some other subsequent news events sort of take over. But I think that's an essential question as to what role does this physical packaging of our bodies play in how we understand one another, how we excuse and forgive crimes, who gets forgiveness, and it obscures that essential question of if Luigi is forgivable, and I say Luigi just as a stand-in for someone like that, is King Kong forgivable too, or why not? Is eternity forgivable too, or why not? To whom is forgiveness extended that? Is King Kong forgivable too, or why not? Is eternity forgivable too, or why not? To whom is forgiveness extended? Well, I actually do it. So I wrote this book in 2018, but I actually do have a Luigi character in it. But Luigi is the United Healthcare, the alleged United Healthcare shooter.
It was so interesting to see everybody comment on his body.
Yes. Yes.
And I was like, that's so interesting. But if a black man or black queer man or black trans man would have committed that crime,
yeah,
it would have been a different story.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, it didn't just come from the population. It came from the infrastructure too. What I mean by that is I will never forget the image of Luigi doing his I guess it was a perp walk, but it was like Batman style theater, like Gotham City. Yeah. They had 50 agents, the mayor. I mean, they had for him, right? Like it was a tremendous theater, no notes, right? It was incredible. Yeah, but would they have done that for a different type? Would it have been necessary? Would that theater have been compelling with a different kind of defendant, right? And why not, right? Why would the visual just not quite translate that same Gotham City way if the defendant looked different? So
I think I have time for one more question.
Sure.
So I've talked about the philosophical nature of your book. It's very philosophical, and I used to hate philosophical fiction, but when it's a speculative fiction, chef's kiss. And And you talked about like your intellectual curiosity. So I'm curious about process. I don't think I've asked you about your writing process. So was it research first versus research during? Of course, it's going to be research during, but I guess the real questions are: you a plotter? Are you a pantser? What's your process with writing? Research during, but I guess the real questions are: you a plotter? Are you a pantser? What's your process with writing?
So nitty writing process, I am like a plotter to the plottest degree. And yet every single time I can try to get down in the weeds and, and it just changes when I get there. So I've had to learn to just plot and then let go of it a little bit and accept that it's going to be what it becomes. And especially with a character like Eternity, I know at the risk of sounding like I used a Ouija board to write this, she really just spoke to me. Like we're very, very different people. We have very different experiences. But it was really just a matter of letting her talk to me. And sometimes what I thought the story was just not what she said it was. And so she took over.
And you can tell in the book, because I think there are some writers who will write a character that is their opposite, and it becomes a caricature of what they think their character could be. And there was never a moment in the book where I was like, she wouldn't do that. Like you could really tell. My work aligns with like sitting with the dead and the ideas of like doing historical, literary necromancy and telling historical fiction, right? But even thinking about sitting with the multitude and plurality of eternities and allowing them all to speak to you, to all tell their story. Like you really did a good job at telling the lay person, the everyday person, and showing the quotidian. So well
thank
done.
You. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for reading it.
It's no problem.
Taking the time. I think it's an entertaining story too.
I ate it up. So for the audience and everyone out there on the live, what's next?
So I can't say that much about what's next, but what I will say is I am writing another standalone book, so it's unrelated to Last Chance Live, and I think it's really cool, and I wish I could tell you the concept. I think you're gonna love it.
Okay.
But it's exploring the question of whether America needs a third founding. And what I mean by that is if the first founding was 1787 with an animating principle of all men are created equal, we know how that worked out. And then the second founding was 1865 with that animating principle in the 13th to 15th Amendments. A number of public intellectuals have raised the question of what's next. And this book that I'm writing, which takes place in where the part of the country where my people come from, which is Gullah culture and Edisto Island.
I love Edisto. Oh my God.
Yeah. Oh, we gotta talk about Edisto. This book is examining the question of whether adult and young readers need to figure out what is the new animating principle for America, because these other ones are not cutting it, right? And that's probably coming up soon, maybe 2028. We'll see. So I'm really excited to share that book.
I'm excited to read it. So she's going to be on book tour soon. So go to her Instagram, go look at the tour dates, and whenever she comes to your city, make sure you buy the book, read it, listen to her, and ask questions because you're going to have some. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for reading. And this has been fantastic.
It's been great.